In 1963, an office worker could smoke through a meeting, drink with a client before lunch was over, and call a grown woman honey across the room. And the strange part is, almost nobody thought it was strange. Open the top drawer of a desk from that year, and there's a good chance you'd find an ashtray. Not hidden, not embarrassing, just sitting there beside the stapler and paper clips, like it belonged because it did. That was the office world many Americans once knew. Some of it is funny now, some of it is hard to believe, and some of it, honestly, you can understand why it disappeared. This is a look at 10 weird office rules and habits that were completely normal in the 1960s. Not every office was the same. Not every worker had the same experience. But if you spent time in a mid-century American workplace, at least a few of these would have felt familiar. Rule 1. Ashtrays and smoke. The ashtray wasn't something you brought from home. In many American offices of the early 1960s, it came with the building, built into the armrests of waiting room chairs, set flush into the edges of conference tables, placed beside the guest chair across from the boss's desk, not as an afterthought, but as part of the original furniture order. By the mid-1960s, roughly 42% of American adults smoked, and the workday was structured around it. You could light up at your desk, in a meeting, in the hallway between appointments. By 4 in the afternoon, the room didn't just smell like smoke. It looked like it had weather, a soft blue haze sitting just below the ceiling, heavy enough that you noticed it when you walked in from outside, and stopped noticing it 10 minutes later. Your jacket carried it home. The paper on your desk carried it. It was simply part of what the office smelled like. The way coffee and carpet and copy machine, ink, were part of what the office smelled like. The U.S. Surgeon General released his landmark report linking smoking to serious health risks in 1964. Most American workplaces didn't ban it until the 1990s. That's a 30-year gap between knowing and changing. The weird part wasn't the ashtray. It was that nobody noticed it. Rule 2. Drinking during business lunch. The 3-martini lunch wasn't a punchline yet. It was a business practice. It belonged to a business world where deals were built over lunch. And lunch did not always mean food. A long afternoon with a client meant a real drink, often more than one, and then you came back and finished the day. Senior men kept a bottle in the bottom drawer, brought out for closing a deal or marking the end of a hard week. Bar carts sat in executive offices the way coffee machines sit in break rooms today. The habit was common enough that decades later, politicians would debate whether the business lunch should remain tax-deductible. The argument wasn't whether it happened. Everyone knew it happened. The argument was whether the government should keep subsidizing it, showing up to that culture sober and stiff, could actually read as not being a team player. That detail sounds small, but it says a lot about what the office rewarded. Rule 3. Vanishing after 5 p.m. This is the one people get genuinely nostalgic about, and it's worth being precise about why. When the clock hit 5, you left. You took your coat, you said goodnight, and you walked out the door. And that was it, not just for the evening, but completely. There was no device in your pocket the office could reach, no inbox that followed you onto the train, no notification waiting when you sat down for dinner. Your evening was yours, not because anyone had negotiated for it, not because a policy protected it, but because the technology to take it hadn't been invented yet. The work lived in the building, in the filing cabinets, on the paper. The moment you walked out, you were simply gone. Today, disappearing after work can feel like a luxury. Back then, it was just how the world worked. A lot of people remember that feeling. Some of them still miss it. Rule for typing pools. In large American companies of the early 1960s, there was often an entire room dedicated to a single task, typing. Not one secretary, not a handful. A room full of women, sometimes dozens, seated in rows, each at her own machine, working through a steady queue of documents that arrived from other departments and left again, finished, without the typist ever meeting the person who'd written them. It was called the typing pool, and it ran like a production floor. Work came in, moved through the room, and went out. Speed and accuracy were measured. You didn't need to know the project. You needed to know the keys. And yet, anyone who heard that room knew it took discipline, memory, and speed that most people in the office simply did not have. The women who worked there were genuinely skilled, but the system was designed so that the skill stayed invisible. The typing pool didn't survive the personal computer. By the mid-1980s, it was largely gone, but for 2 decades, it was the quiet engine underneath the modern American office. Strange now to think about. Completely unremarkable then. Rule 5. Mandatory retirement at 65. Imagine being the person everyone came to for answers, the man who knew where the old files were, which client never liked surprises, and how the company had survived the last hard year. Then, one birthday arrived, and the office decided his usefulness had an expiration date. At many American companies in the 1960s, there was an age at which a career simply ended. Not because of performance, not because of any failure, because a number had been reached, 65 mandatory. Retirement policies were common across a wide range of industries during this period. Policies varied significantly by employer, but some estimates suggest the practice covered a large share of older male workers at its peak. The odd thing is, people could be trusted with the company's memory for 30 years, and then, almost overnight, treated as if that memory had expired. A worker might spend 3 decades at the same company and still be required to clear out his desk on a date that had been set long before he ever knew what kind of worker he'd become. Congress abolished mandatory retirement for most industries in 1986. But for the generation that built the post-war American office, the exit date was never negotiated. It was already there, waiting. That sounds impossible now. Back then, it was just part of the deal. Rule 6. Help wanted male, help wanted female. If you opened a major American newspaper in 1962 and turned to the classified section, you wouldn't find 1 column of job listings. You'd find 2 that help wanted male, help wanted female, the better paying positions. The ones with a career path attached ran in the men's column. The women's column ran the typing, the filing, the answering. It wasn't subtle. It wasn't coded. It was the layout of the page printed every morning in black and white. In cities across the country, the Civil Rights Act of 1964 included provisions against employment discrimination based on sex, but the classified pages of major newspapers continued to run gendered columns for years. Afterward, pressure from advocacy groups and regulatory enforcement built slowly before the practice finally ended. For a generation of American women entering the workforce in the early 1960s, the newspaper told them plainly and publicly which opportunities were meant for them. It didn't need to explain itself. It was just the way the page was organized. That's not a hidden rule. That was the rule, printed in black and white, every single morning. Rule 7. Honey, sweetheart, doll. The women who worked in the 1960s American office were addressed differently than the men, not in every office, not by every manager, but commonly enough that it simply wasn't remarked upon. A male colleague might call a woman honey in a meeting without lowering his voice. A supervisor might call his secretary sweetheart without any awareness that it required a second thought. The language was casual, familiar, and so embedded in the texture of daily office life that most people in the room had never stopped to name it as a choice. It was the water. Everyone swam in. What's worth noticing isn't just that the language existed, it's what it reflected. The women in that office were overwhelmingly in supporting roles, and the words used toward them every day matched that. Positioning so naturally that the match itself went unexamined for years, common enough to be invisible. That's usually how the deepest habits work. Rule 8. No modern HR or privacy guardrails. If a manager said something inappropriate to an employee in the 1960s American office, there was nowhere formal to take it. No hotline, no defined procedure. No human resources department, in the modern sense. The concept that certain workplace behavior could constitute a violation that it could have a name. A consequence, a paper trail had simply not arrived yet in most offices, and it wasn't only complaints. Personnel files, salaries, medical notes, performance records. Sometimes home addresses sat in cabinets that weren't always locked. Passed through the typing pool, copied onto carbon paper. The modern idea that a company holds personal information in trust, with rules and liability attached, didn't exist yet. It wasn't that the 1960s office was careless on purpose. The framework simply hadn't been built, and without it, the people with the least power in the office had the least protection. Not a hidden rule, just a wall that hadn't been built yet. Go back to that top drawer, the ashtray next to the stapler. Here's what's strange about all 8 of these. Taken together, none of them were secret. None of them were hiding. They were the visible, accepted, unremarkable surface of daily American work life for an entire generation, the kind of generation that built careers in those offices, raised families on those salaries, and retired from those jobs into a world that was already starting to look different. Some of what they had, we genuinely lost. An evening that couldn't be interrupted, a workday with a hard edge, a kind of ease that doesn't quite exist anymore. That part of the memory is real, and it's worth feeling something about. The rest of it changed because the office finally had to reckon with the gap between what it said it valued and how it actually ran. That reckoning took decades. It's still going in some places. These rules didn't disappear because the office suddenly became less fun. They disappeared because more people finally had a say in what normal was allowed to mean. Subscribe for more stories about the America that used to be.